Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we have loot from 100 Shaper kills. That's right, took him down 100 times, and what is the reason for that? The reason is I want to get, without a shadow of a doubt, a good idea of the drop chances on the items from him before the new patch drops, with 3.9 making Shaper much harder to access. The reason behind this is that boss farming is one of the most lucrative things you can do in Path of Exile, presuming you have the information about how often you get certain items and whether you'll turn a profit. Understanding the amount of margin that you're going to make on buying the sets to run Shaper, the amount of time it takes you, and then figuring out which boss, whether that's Shaper or another one, is most profitable is key. And that's exactly what you guys are going to learn at the end of this video. So to begin with, of course, Shaper is an iconic boss fight. He is often the end game of many players who play Path of Exile in the current patch cycle. Of course, moving forward into patch 3.9, that will be changing, and he will become niche content similar to Bestiary, which most players will no longer have an opportunity to engage in, which is critical information and will make his drops worth significantly more as they are more rare. So with that in mind, we have to kind of assess these things a little bit different. But let's take a look at the fight overall. To begin with, he is a pretty slow fight. He has multiple phases, multiple immunity phases, and he doesn't kind of allow for a speed clear playstyle like something like Bestiary farming does in like that kind of scenario. So he is going to yield less kills per hour versus something like Sackawal or Farrell, meaning that he already starts a little bit behind. Having said that though, Shaper has some of the most powerful items in the game overall. He has Solstice Vigil, which is one of the best amulets, specifically with high-end gear like Headhunter. He has Dying Sun, which is hands down probably one of the most overpowered flasks in the game, specifically for patch 3.9 and onwards, with bow characters wanting it a lot and it becoming significantly rarer. He also has Starforge, which is a highly sought after physical based sword. And finally he has the niche kind of item, Shaper's Touch, which can be used for energy shield stacking builds. And he also does have the less sought after Voidwalker boots. So this actually does make up a particularly powerful drop table. And in addition to that, he can also drop T16 maps as well as item 86 Shaper dropped items, so like amulets and stuff like that, and those will increase in value as of 3.9 forward as well, due to the fact that they are becoming more rare. So pretty interesting drop table, and maybe that makes up for how slow he is to clear, but maybe not. That's really going to depend on how much min-maxing and the kind of percentages on these items are. So to begin with, of course, if you want to run Shaper, moving forward you will need to acquire one of each of the Guardian fragments. That's Chimera, Hydra, Phoenix, and Minotaur, and these can be picked up either by running the Guardian maps if you can get them to drop, which I believe they can drop in 3.9, or by completing them through Zana, which can be found in maps, or by buying them off other players. So with that said, we're already well into a Shaper kill here, and he still isn't down. It takes about 5 minutes of run. Let's get into the spreadsheet and take a look at my drops. So of course, if you are interested in getting the hideout, I didn't have it before running this, so it took me 64 runs to acquire the Celestial hideout, which is pretty interesting there, and that's a bit of a tidbit of information for you guys looking to get that now. So the first thing we need to look at is the expenses. So to begin with, these prices are based on week 1 in Blight League. Have to keep in mind though that Blight League was a minion focused league, so a lot of Shaper's items went in high demand by the vast majority of the player base, and that's going to be kind of a theme going forward. It's going to depend on what kind of players are playing in the league. For example, in patch 3.9 there will be a ton of bow builds. What do bow builds use? Projectiles. What's a very good projectile item? Dying Sun. In addition to that, bow builds also like to use Headhunter and Inspired Learning, so Solstice Vigil will also be in demand. So, with Blight League in mind, we have the prices from week 1. I felt they were a little bit more accurate than standard prices. So to begin with, we can see here that the fragments were fairly cheap, despite a lot of the drops being quite expensive, which is pretty interesting there. So pretty good entry cost here, just under 40C, which is not bad at all. Overall, we spent about 32C getting in the door, so not too bad. Let's take a look at the drops. So Shaper's Touch was in high demand due to it being a summoner league and a lot of those summoners being energy shield bases. So it started off the week at 9 chaos. We had Dying Sun at 164. It's one of the rarer drops and also a very powerful one, so it kind of has that premium price tag. Next up, we obviously have Starforge here at 205C, very low for the kind of rarity that is attached to it, but it was of course not a melee league, it was summoner. Next we have Voidwalkers, the worst drop from Shaper, and one of the most common was at 1C week 1, and we have Solstice Vigil at a whopping almost 400 chaos. So let's take a look at what kind of drops I was getting. So overall, I got 43 Shaper's Touches. That is a lot of gloves, and it is by far the most common drop. And as I've taken a look at other people's results, this is consistent. This is the most common drop that you will get off Shaper, and it's fine that it is a decent drop as well. If you're looking to kind of not want to sell these for 4 or 5C each, you can actually corrupt these, as many of the corruptions do sell for like an Exalt or more, if you get a good one, specifically aura levels and stuff like that. So that also can be an avenue to kind of increase your currency from Shaper. So Dying Sun, of course, here, I actually got 20 of them. So it's definitely not as rare as everyone says. I think this is a pretty consistent as well with everyone else's information. It's in the 15 to 25% chance to drop range. Of course, it could be lower or higher than that. No one can say for sure, but that's kind of what I've been seeing on other people with similar tests. So it's a fairly common drop, and you can expect to get one in 5 kind of per kill. You know what I mean? So definitely not a bad drop there, and that actually will make up the bulk of the amount of currency that you're getting. You should base your kind of like currency per hour and whether it's worth it to do Shaper based on the price of Dying Sun. That's kind of what you should be looking at. If Dying Sun is super duper expensive and the sets aren't too expensive themselves, you should kind of try and look to maybe farm Shaper, because you will actually make quite a bit of currency that way off the Dying Sun drops, as it seems to be fairly common. Next up, of course, Starforge. This one caused massive amounts of controversy in Legion League. We heard reports of people running like 200 Shapers and not getting one, although I'm not sure if those were completely accurate. I ran 100 and I got 3 Starforges, so it's definitely a rare item. I've heard people say that they've got none. I've heard people say that they've got like 5. So I would guess that it's around the 2 or 3% drop chance kind of area. Maybe it's a little bit higher, maybe it's a little bit lower, but it's definitely not a high drop chance, that's for sure. So if you're chasing Starforge, you're probably better off farming something else and just buying it, because farming it is going to be quite a tall order indeed. So that's pretty interesting in my opinion. And overall, when I'm assessing kind of a loot drop table from a boss, how I like to do it is if a drop is below 5% or 5%, I kind of don't want to count it, because let's say I ran 20, the chance of me actually getting that to drop is fairly low. I'm a big advocate for consistency and kind of getting a good amount of currency. I'm not a big fan of gambling in PoE, so I kind of like to go with consistent drops, and anything that's below 5% has a pretty low chance of dropping. You could get you could get like 10 or you could get like 0, if you kind of get what I mean. So it's pretty hard to rely on that. So for that kind of situation, I wouldn't count the amount of currency from Starforge or Solstice Vigil when I'm deciding whether or not to do Shaper. I'd base it purely off the other 3 drops, and if I get a Starforge or a Solstice Vigil, it's just a bonus. Next up we have Voidwalker, of course, the 1C item, very common, just behind Shaper's Touch, and this again is consistent with everyone else's kind of reports. It's the second most common drop. It's definitely not as common as Shaper's Touch. Next up we have Solstice Vigil. So Solstice Vigil, I believe, has a pretty similar drop chance to Starforge. I would say they're probably identical. They're both very rare, and it kind of seems to kind of move either one way or the other. You either get more Starforges or Solstice Vigils, but it's around the 2 to 3, 4 kind of area, what you can expect to get from killing 100 Shapers. They're very rare, and you can't expect to get a lot of them, which is pretty interesting as it's a very sought after item. So pretty cool, and that definitely does change things quite a bit when you're trying to assess Shaper. So of course, when you're looking to kind of figure out whether you should be running him, you have to take into account that he's a very long boss fight. He takes about 5 minutes to kill him with a geared character and without dying. Of course, you could probably make that a little bit faster using something like an insta-phasing mine character or something like that. But with your normal kind of run-of-the-mill character, it's going to take a little bit of time, and that is definitely going to eat into how much currency you're making per hour. But don't let that deter you, because obviously there are some big ticket items. Now, if we were to discount Solstice Vigil and Starforge, we would only make actually a profit of 500. So if we got really unlucky and we only got like 0 Starforges and 0 Solstice Vigils and relied on that Dying Sun, we would still turn a profit, but it wouldn't be too much. And that is kind of a little bit of a concern. So when I'm assessing whether I want to do Shaper, I'm going to be kind of comparing how much I'd make off just pure Dying Suns and the gloves and stuff like that versus, for example, all of what I'd make from farming Bestiary or something like that. So that's kind of how I look at it, guys. Hopefully you guys have learned something from my results here and how to kind of assess a boss. Make sure you take into account, of course, how much it costs, how long it's going to take you, and how kind of frequent you can expect a big drop. So with that said, I'll see you guys in the next one, and look out for plenty more boss killing content because it is on the way. Until then, I'll catch you.